This is 90.3 KRNU Lincoln.
Up the floor to Trey McGowan. He'll lob it for his... Oh, my goodness! A one-hand hammer!
On 90.3 KRNU, it's Huskers Hoops Live.
You betcha! Jazz Shelley has a triple-double!
Now, here's your host, Jacob Schwantz.
Welcome in, everybody. Huskers Hoops Live is back on the air. It feels amazing to be back with everybody on 90.3 KRNU and again on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. If you missed today's show, you can go back on the channel. All of these episodes will be back and available on demand if you want to listen. But things are looking pretty good here in Lincoln. It's beautiful weather. It's been pretty beautiful basketball. And that's something that's been kind of a rarity, as it seems like Huskers basketball is starting to kind of turn a corner. I can't say the same about my Buffalo Bills, as the Bills kind of just completely blew yesterday's Monday Night Football game against the Denver Broncos. That was a tough one to watch, but it was made a little bit easier after getting back from a pretty dominating performance by the Huskers men's basketball team against Rider. It was awesome to see all these players start to finally figure some things out. We saw the return of the big man on campus, Keisei Tominaga. We'll get into all of that and a lot more on today's show, but let's get into some show notes. So today I'm going to go over all of the games that happened this past week, including last night's one against Rider. We'll talk a little bit about some of the other big games and where the Big Ten Conference stands as a whole. And I'll also look around at the conference and see some of the ways that Nebraska kind of fits in. Where does this Nebraska basketball team fit into this year's conference? Because there's been a lot of upsets. There's been some good and some bad in the Big Ten so far. So that's going to be kind of fun to look at. We'll take a glimpse also at what's coming up for the men's and women's basketball team here in Nebraska. We've got a game tonight. We've got a game tomorrow night. We've got some games this weekend. It is going to be a packed show and a packed week of basketball for us to kind of break down and watch, react to, and hopefully it stays on the same track as these past few games have looked, as, you know, really all of the news for both these teams, both Coach Hoiberg and Coach Williams' teams, are 2-0. It's a pretty good start to the season. Obviously, these are non-conference games that both these teams put on their schedule. I say both these teams, both these programs, speaking about the men's and women's basketball team, put on their schedule in order to get some tune-up games, get some wins under their belt. And while it's easy to say that you should expect wins from these games, that's not always the case. You look at Michigan State just last week. They take a loss in overtime at home to James Madison, who I don't know if you guys saw, but James Madison followed that up with a double overtime, I believe. Yeah, double overtime win over Kent State. And yeah, they started off 2-0. Really impressive stuff from James Madison, but yeah, that's just a crazy start for them. But back to that game. That was a game, Michigan State, number 4 in the country. That was a game that they were expecting to win, probably going away. And obviously they could have, as they only made 1-3. But, you know, any other night, they probably win that game by 10, 15, at least maybe 20 points if they could actually shoot the ball like everyone knows that they can. But that's just an example of these early season, not necessarily exhibition, but just kind of non-conference, basically preseason games are no gimme. And I think Nebraska, both on the men's and the women's side, did a good job of being ready for that. Let's talk about the men's games first from this past week. We'll start with Florida A&M. The Rattlers came into Lincoln this past week. And ladies and gentlemen, Rink Mast went off. 20 points, 16 rebounds. He was the first Husker since the year of 2008 I would have only been 6 years old at that time to have at least 20 points and 15 rebounds in a game. It was his 19th career double-double for Rink Mast. So just to put that in perspective, just think about some of these players that Nebraska has had over the past few years, even under just Coach Hoiberg. You've got Derek Walker, who was just a constant force for this Huskers team over these past 3 or 4 years now. He didn't have any 20 and 15 games. You think back to Isaiah Roby, one of the best players in Nebraska recent history. Now he's off in the NBA doing good things. He wasn't the most recent 20 and 15 game. So just really cool stuff to see that this year's team and some of these transfers are already making such an impact. And that was a fun game. I wasn't in the building. I was producing that broadcast for KRNU. So if you guys aren't tuning into those broadcasts, make sure you start tuning in. I'll actually be calling a few games for KRNU in the next few weeks for men's basketball. So that's going to be fun. But yeah, I was producing that game against Florida A&M, and it was just great to listen and watch as Rink Mast just continues to snag these rebounds. He was hitting shots. That's just the big thing. When your center is rebounding the ball like that, for a team like Nebraska that's struggled to rebound the basketball over these past few years under Coach Hoiberg, I feel like that's going to be a big difference. And I'll talk a little bit about it when I get to the Rider game, about some concerns I have with the rebounding for Nebraska. Even though the numbers were good, I just have a little bit of concern about how Nebraska is going about it. But to have a center that's rebounding as well as Rink Mast, he got his 19th career double-double against Florida A&M. He got his 20th last night. But that's going to do wonders for this Nebraska team this year if they can continue that going forward. It's only 2 games through the season, so you can't make too many bold claims about how this season's going to go yet, but it seems like at least the philosophy is there for this team to be a good rebounding team. But moving on from Rink Mast, Eli Rice, he started his college career off with a bang. In just his second game of his career, went for 16 points, 3 3-pointers made. Nebraska freshman is just making a huge impact. I'll get into kind of his limited time last night, but man, I really like what Eli Rice has been bringing to the table. I feel like he has the length, the offensive capability, and he just looks good. He's smooth with his left hand. That 3-point shot looks really good, and this is a team, at least through the first few games for Nebraska, they rely heavily on the 3-point shooting. They are not a team that's about to try to back you down in the post, slow offense. This is a up-tempo offense, quick up the court, get a quick look from 3, and they're letting it fly. Last night was no different, maybe even more. But Eli Rice looks ready for the moment. We'll see if he can continue that once some of these higher difficulty games come up onto the schedule. We've got Oregon State coming up this Saturday. I don't know how much he'll play in that game or if he'll get many minutes, but I just really liked what he brought to the table against the Rattlers last week. It's going to be a crowded wing for Eli Rice to try to find some minutes once players like Juwan Gary are back. I mean, you look up and down the roster, he's competing with Bryce Williams, CJ Wilcher at times, Sam Hoiberg even potentially at times when the Huskers go small. Obviously, Juwan Gary, and even if the Huskers want to go big, it could potentially even be Josiah Alec competing with Eli Rice for minutes at that wing position. So you look at all those guys. Eli, obviously the youngest and the least experienced of that bunch. So I'm assuming that's probably something Coach Hoiberg isn't looking to kind of utilize over some of these more experienced guys, especially once these important games pop up on the schedule. But that's why I was thinking, why don't you play Eli a little bit more in a game like yesterday where you've already got a pretty big lead. You have about 8 or 9 minutes left in the end of regulation to get some chemistry and get some rhythm going for some of your guys. Why don't you put somebody like Eli Rice in there to get going, and maybe he finds a little bit of a shooting spree, and coming up in some of these games, you need someone off the bench. He can come in and give you 2 or 3 3-pointers like he did against Florida A&M last week. So interesting kind of decision-making process for this Nebraska team as they finally begin to get healthy. It was such a strange offseason and early preseason with all these injuries and unavailabilities at times. So glad to see that they're finally starting to get back to full strength. And I expect by Saturday they will be pretty much back to full strength. And I didn't even mention some of these other players that would be coming back, like Ramel Lloyd. We haven't got to see him yet. So this bench is going to be deep for Nebraska this year, and I'm here for it. It's going to be fun. So you look at the second half against Florida A&M. The Huskers opened up with a 19-6 scoring run. That's really good to see after you think back to the first game of the year against Lindenwood. The three-point shooting and a lot of the offense kind of dissipated in the second half. I believe they only made 2 threes in the second half, made 9 in the first against Lindenwood. So that consistency, I was talking about it, I believe on last week's show, just a little bit of concern how this team is going to handle the inconsistency and the games like that, where once the challenge is a little bit higher with an Illinois in town, or you're on the road at Michigan or Michigan State, how is this Huskers team going to manage some of those games where they get hot and then they get cold? But these last 2 games, I mean, they've gone on some major runs in the second half, and that I feel like is going to make this team even better. To be able to go on a run like that in the second half, if you're up, you get up big. If you're down, you can get back into a game and maybe even take a lead. So those second half runs could be crucial, and a 19-6 scoring run is no joke. That's a positive 13 differential in those minutes. So Nebraska, if they were down double digits to a team at half, don't count them out like you may have in the past few years, because this team can get hot. And that 19-6 scoring run was with no Keisei Tominaga. He didn't play against Florida A&M. He only played last night against Rider. So they did that without their best scorer. And Keisei Tominaga, everybody knows how hot he can get in a hurry. He's like a microwave. So some of these second half scoring runs could be even better than they've already been. So that's an exciting thing that I hope Nebraska can continue. But just, pretty solid game overall for the men's basketball team to start last week. And I thought it was a good showing. But let's move on to last night, because Rider came in and I think gave Nebraska a little bit more of a challenge than they were expecting. If not the players, definitely the fans. I think PBA was pretty quiet in the first half. They were trying to energize the team. They were trying to get them to go on a big run. I was in the building with a couple of my friends in the student section, so we saw them live in front of our eyes in person. And Rider was physical. Rider was fast. They were going after us on the glass, and it didn't end up mattering. Rink Mast, he got his 20th career double-double after pulling off number 19 in the game prior. But really, I mean, the story of the night is Keisei Tominaga returning to the court. He did struggle by his standards, but that's the story of the night regardless. One of the best three-point shooters, not only in the conference, but in the country. And he comes back from a bit of an ankle injury that he suffered in the exhibition game. And he didn't look hobbled at all. He seemed fine. It was just some of those shots weren't really going down for him. He was looking a little bit frustrated, not necessarily with himself, but just with the way that the night was kind of going for him. it was kind of a strange start to the season for Keisei Tominaga in his first game. He couldn't quite find much rhythm at all. I can pull up the official box score from last night's game. I believe he shot 13 threes and only made, I believe, 2 or 3 of them. So that's something that is probably not going to be a pattern. Yeah, 13 field goal attempts, 11 three-pointers, made 3 of 11. So not that good for somebody that we know is as good of a shooter as Keisei Tominaga. But overall, Nebraska goes 9 for 32 from three-point range. That's just 28%. Not great. 7 made threes in the first half, only 2 of 14 from deep in the second half. So again, some of this three-point shooting is beginning to dissipate once that second half hits. That's definitely a concern for this Huskers team because, like I mentioned a few shows ago, or maybe last show, some of these challenging teams will go on a massive run if Nebraska's not able to keep up offensively. But if they're not keeping up offensively, I think the defensive end is where they're going to secure some of these wins. They went on a 17-0 run in the second half against Rider last night. Again, a second half run, double digits. This time might have been even better than the Florida A&M run because they didn't let Rider score. I believe it was over 9 minutes of the second half. It was at least over 7 from what I saw earlier before they scored in the second half. But I think it was over 9 minutes that Nebraska held Rider to no points. That is elite defense. I mean, we were watching, there were almost no shots that were open when they got to the rim. Guys were collapsing. 3-point closeouts were pretty good, except there was one in the first half where CJ, he caught a little bit of the wrist on one of the Rider shooters, so they got a 4-point play. That was really the only closeout in the game that was bad. I mean, I think Sam Hoiberg got caught on a shooting foul as well on the perimeter, but that one I thought was a missed call. Didn't seem like he had that much contact at all. It seemed like they were just looking to blow the whistle in that play. But overall, I thought the defense was very elite last night, and that's something that Nebraska has to rely on. I was listening to Coach Hoiberg after the game, and he was being asked about this again. How do you kind of manage some of these games where you start to struggle offensively? And he mentioned the defense has to be as good as it was tonight. They have to not necessarily go on these 17-0 runs, but if they can come in and get maybe a quick 9-0 run just from the defense, get a couple and ones, get a 3-pointer from Keisei or Jamarcus, and just start to work yourself back into a game for 3 or 4 minutes at a time, those runs can be huge because this is a good Nebraska basketball team. They're not going undefeated. They're going to get down in some of these hard games, and they're going to need to be able to have those 3, 4, 5-minute chunks where they're limiting the scoring of the other team and actually getting back and eating into a little bit of a deficit that they'd gotten themselves into. So good to see that 2 games in a row they can work themselves in a way where they're utilizing a defense and a physical style on the defensive end to kind of dominate their opponent. Leading scorer last night, CJ Wilcher, 13 points, 3 3-pointers in the first half. Good to see him. I think it was Nick Baugh watching that game back talking about how he thinks CJ Wilcher really is that 40% guy from a couple seasons ago, and it was just kind of a rough year last year for him, and he didn't really reach that total percentage-wise, I should say. But I'm not sure. It's kind of tough. I feel like he looks good, but it's early in the season, and some of the defense may not be as good or as physical or as long as some of these Big Ten teams. But if Wilcher's going to come in and get 13 points, 9, 10, 11 points a night off the bench, because he did come off the bench for Keisei Tominaga tonight, And he was asked about that as well in the post game. And he said, my role doesn't change. Come in, get buckets, play good defense, and shoot. And that's exactly what he did. Very efficient night for CJ Wilcher. His overall day, 4 for 8 from the field, 3 for 5 from 3, 2 for 2 at the line, 5 rebounds, only 2 fouls, 1 assist. Pretty good night from CJ Wilcher. Hopefully that can be continued as we move into some of these tougher games in the next few weeks. Obviously, Oregon State on Saturday, Creighton, I believe, in 3 weeks from this weekend. So some pretty big games coming up for Nebraska basketball. Let's get into Keisei Tominaga, though. 9 points on 22 minutes of action. You can tell he was frustrated. Couldn't get any rhythm going. He got the run in that second half, 17-0 run. He pretty much started it. He had 2 3-pointers, but that was basically it for him in the second half. And I think something that's kind of going underrated is Nebraska's still missing a piece offensively that can feed him on those cuts backdoor or across the face of a defender like Derek Walker and even at times Sam Griesel did last year. Those were lethal offensively for Nebraska. He graded out, I believe, as one of the best cutters in the Big Ten just because he was so efficient on them, and players defensively have to be so tight and right up on him at the three-point line where he's almost able to just kind of sneak by around them, and there's a wide open lane because Nebraska plays that spread offense. There's not a lot of packing the paint that they can do, especially last year when Nebraska's center, Derek Walker, is becoming kind of the primary initiator of a little backdoor set to Keisei. So there's no center kind of sitting in the paint unless they're running a zone. And those were super effective last year. So the Huskers have to figure out a way to get that into their offense again, because I think those were important, not just for the team, but for Keisei himself, because he was able to see the ball go in the net in an easy way. And Keisei is a guy that once he sees a couple go in, they're almost all going to go in, no matter what distance. It could be from 20, it could be from 25, it could be from 30. It could be from beyond 30. We've seen him do it before, pulling up in transition. I mean, he's lethal, but if he's going to start off like he did yesterday, just in like a tough start, I think he made his second shot of the night after missing a 3, but he got the scoring going for Nebraska. But outside of that, he really struggled in the first half. So hopefully they can figure out a way to kind of get him going a little bit earlier on. But with the return of Keisei and all the positives with that, I want to talk about Eli Rice again, because he only had 3 minutes yesterday, went 1 for 1, hit a 3 in the corner. But is that really what's best for this Nebraska team? I mean, you think about all he's done so far in his freshman season. He led the team in scoring over Spain from all reports. He was one of the leading scorers the previous 2 games of the season. So why do you shut him down with this little playing time, especially against an opponent like Ryder? I mean, you're going to have to keep an eye on whether it was maybe he was hobbled just a little bit. I don't think so. He didn't seem like he was dealing with any sort of injury that could hold him out. It seemed like they just didn't have any minutes in the rotation for him. And that was a little bit disappointing to me because he provides so much versatility offensively. And I feel like Nebraska needs to bring that out of him because you never know how long he could be here. So the most you can get out of Eli Rice, I think the better. And I think he needs to get some more minutes. 3 minutes for Eli Rice. If he's averaging 3 minutes per game, I think there's something wrong with this basketball team. But the Huskers rebounded really well. Coach Hoiberg in the postgame said he was proud of the way his team was able to out-rebound Ryder, who he mentioned they out-rebounded Marquette in that recent matchup, which is pretty interesting to see. 47 rebounds for Nebraska, 34 for Ryder. So, again, if they're going to rebound well, they're going to do well in the conference. that just is what it is. Purdue, a good rebounding team. They were the number 1 seed out of the Big Ten and one of the top seeds in the March Madness tournament. A lot of the good rebounding teams are making the postseason, and that's what Nebraska's trying to do. So if they can continue that, I think they're going to be in a good position. 3-point shooting, as I try to kind of wrap up this segment, 3-point shooting was rough yesterday, but overall, just a very satisfying and kind of encouraging past few games for this men's basketball team. They start 3-0 to the season, but they've still got a lot of things to work on. So kind of heading into the rest of this week and moving forward through the non-conference schedule, it's going to be crucial that this team continues to rebound and starts to figure out a way to get Keisei Tominaga a little bit more involved outside of just the 3-point line. But as we send it to break, I want to just give a little bit of a preview. We'll get into some of these women's basketball games, including last week's matchup against the Wyoming Cowgirls here on 90.3 KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
Make a difference for kids, for people in poverty, for the environment. Join AmeriCorps and get things done right here in Nebraska. With lots of different programs to choose from, you can serve in your area of passion and develop your skills while earning money to pay for college or to repay student loans. All programs are filling AmeriCorps positions to start September 1st. Learn more and apply at serve.nebraska.gov. Sponsored by Serve Nebraska. Aired with the Nebraska Broadcasters Association and this station.
Air, fundamental to all living things, and it's all thanks to trees. Not only do trees supply oxygen, they also provide homes to wildlife, filter water, and let's not forget their natural beauty. But the trees need your help. The Nebraska Arbor Day Foundation is doing their part to revitalize forests across the country, and you can help. Donate to the Nebraska Arbor Day Foundation today by visiting www.arborday.org. Be that breath of fresh air and ensure forests live on for future generations.
I'm Steve Clements, businessman and cyclist.
I'm Jeff Blymeister, Chief Deputy Sheriff and cyclist.
Riding on roads can be dangerous when motorists are not cautious. A year ago, I was hit by a car while biking in the county.
Cyclists have a legal right to use the road, and drivers must give them at least 3 feet of space. It's the law.
Cyclists should wear helmets, be highly visible, and use lights after dark.
We can share the road safely.
Learn more at lincoln.ne.gov.
If you're experiencing anxiety, depression, grief, or are even just homesick, try talking to a friendly professional at CAPS, your university's counseling and psychological service. They offer individual and group services to any registered student at UNL. International students, that means you too. Just call your university health center on city campus anytime Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. The services are easy and confidential, and the best part is the first 3 sessions are free. Go online at health.unl.edu/CAPS.
Back live on Huskers Hoops Live. Thanks for joining us this morning on 90.3 KRNU and on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. Again, if you want to listen back to this show, they will all be on demand and available for you on the channel. Let's get into now the Huskers women's basketball game as they were able to take down Wyoming this past weekend. And it appears that the second half runs aren't just for the men's basketball team, as Coach Williams' squad went on a 19-2 run in the second half to get a 21-point lead, a 19-point win. This was awesome. This was a great game. There were some concerns. Wyoming is by far the best team on this early season schedule for the Nebraska women's basketball team. Obviously, you've got matchups a little later on in the non-conference that might be tougher, but definitely in these first few weeks, Wyoming was the main challenge. Obviously, Fertig is a great player. They're a team that got pretty deep into the WNIT a couple weeks into their So really nice to see this Nebraska team take them down. But it all started to go off when Markowski started to go off. 10 of the 19 points during that run were from Alexis Markowski. And she also got her 22nd career double-double. The first of the season, 17 points, 13 rebounds. So you think about that game, it's almost similar to what we've just been talking about with Rink Mast. They're the Nebraska center, physically dominating and getting after it on the glass. So pretty cool that Alexis Markowski was able to get going in this way. But if Nebraska is going to have two dominant, experienced centers on men's and women's basketball, look out, because I think that's going to lead to a lot of wins. And I don't know if the national media is ready for two great Nebraska basketball teams. But the Huskers also got 4 scorers in double figures. And it seems like it's going to be a very balanced offense this year for Nebraska. You had 17 from Mark, 15 for Shelley and for Natalie Potts. And then you also had 11 for Darian White. This looks like it's going to be the big 4 for Nebraska this season, no doubt. Natalie Potts, she's one of the biggest stories in Nebraska basketball this past week, won Big Ten Freshman of the Week. We talked a little bit these last few episodes about if these Nebraska freshmen will or can keep it up, what could it mean for the depth for this year's squad, and how good can they be if some of these freshmen continue to step up? And it seems like Natalie Potts is doing just that. 6 for 7 from the field. She made a 3. She had 2 rebounds, a block. I mean, she's really doing it all for this team. And again, for those who don't know, she is replacing Izzy Bourne in the starting lineup. Izzy Bourne, one of the longtime players for this team since she got into Lincoln, now back playing pro ball in Australia, doing good things there. So for a freshman to be able to step into that role and not necessarily fill the shoes, but almost do it in her own way. I think Natalie Potts and Izzy Bourne are kind of similar just in the way that they were kind of do-it-all, around type players. Izzy Bourne could get you some rebounds. She could pass the ball. She could defend a little bit. She could rebound. She could block a few shots. She'll get in there in the passing lane. And Natalie Potts is not dissimilar in that way. And I think as she continues to get more experience, I think that she'll look even better. I would like to see her scoring keep at this pace if she's going to be in the starting lineup. I don't want to see her start to defer to some of these more experienced players just because a tough matchup is on the schedule. I don't want to see Maryland or Illinois or Ohio State come onto the court in Lincoln and Natalie Potts all of a sudden thinks, oh, I shouldn't be shooting this basketball because Jazz or Alexis Markowski have been here before. No, Natalie Potts is a great player so far. And if she can continue that and she proves that this isn't a fluke, she should be shooting the same amount of shots as she's been getting early in the season right now. So, and I think that's really the way that this team wants to operate. I don't think they want to just have to rely on Markowski going for 20 and 15 a game, because that's just quite honestly not very, it's hard to rely on that. It's probably not going to happen. I don't think they want to rely on Jazz Shelley going for 25 a game, because history tells us that that's just not going to happen. She's going to be great, but she's not going to be Caitlin Clark going for 25 a game. That's just not how she is. So I think it's a smart move for Coach Williams and this year's basketball team to rely on kind of a by committee offense. It's going to be helpful. So where does Nebraska go from here? Because they're relying on these top 4 players, sharing the offensive load. I think they're going to be looking pretty good heading into some of these more difficult non-conference matchups, because they didn't shoot well from beyond the arc against Wyoming. Only 3 for 17. But, folks, they scored 71 points on 3 made three-pointers. And this is a team, this is a squad that I think is going to make a lot more per game than just 3 3-pointers. They could be up more toward around 80, 85 points against Wyoming that night. So it seems like this team's got it in the bag pretty well. They're on track to kind of have a bounce back season, but you don't want to try to draw too many conclusions from these first 2 games because you never know how it could turn out. There's a lot of season left to go, but it seems like the philosophy of this year's team is a one that I like. I think it's by committee. Let's do this as a team. Make sure that if somebody's having an off night, we're not just completely absent offensively. The chances of Markowski, Darian White, Jazz Shelley, and Natalie Potts all not being there offensively on a night together is very low. So you have to think maybe against some of these tough competitions in Lincoln or on the road, if Markowski goes cold or if Potts kind of has just a classic freshman night where she can't get any of her game going, you would think somebody like Jazz Shelley or Darian White can kind of pick up some of that offensive load. Hopefully Maddie Kroll can make a return sometime soon. Her injury is a bit concerning because she is a good offensive piece on the wing, but it seems like they are a very deep team that's not afraid to let some of these players kind of experiment with their game and try to grow on the court. So pretty fun to see. Logan Nisley and Jess Petrie didn't do too much against Wyoming, but hey, maybe in the next few weeks they will start to get hot and really start to make this Nebraska bench look impeccable. So really fun week of college basketball for Nebraska. A lot of home games, 1 road game at Wyoming, but most important thing, they're all W's. And for a Nebraska program, men's and women's, that's looking to respond and kind of rebound from last year, this is how you do it. This is how you do it. You got to go early season wins. You have to get some confidence in your squads and kind of build up some confidence going into some of these tough Big Ten games. So happy to see that both teams are able to do it, but step aside one more time right here on the Huskers Hoops Live show. And when I come back, I want to take a look around the Big Ten, just kind of take a sense of where does Nebraska fit currently in this competitive conference here on 90.3 KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
This is Logan.
What's up, everyone?
Logan's been going to UNL for 4 years now.
I know everything that's going on here.
Logan is somewhat informed about campus events.
Like the football game? And I think there's some kind of election, I think.
Don't be like Logan. Pick up a copy of the Daily Nebraskan or follow them on Facebook and Twitter. Not only can you be updated with events on campus, you can read profiles on some of the most interesting people around Lincoln and get unique coverage found nowhere else. Because keeping up with the news is one of the most important things a student can do.
What are you still doing with all those old t-shirts that don't even fit anymore? Why not get rid of them by donating them to Goodwill of Lincoln? Goodwill of Lincoln is a not-for-profit organization that takes nearly any household item and item of clothing. Its main mission is willing workers employed and community resources maximized. Goodwill also provides a safe environment for people with mental, physical, and emotional disabilities to be employed. So what are you still doing with those t-shirts? Your freshman 15 is less noticeable in a slightly bigger shirt anyway. Donate the small ones to Goodwill of Lincoln. To contact Goodwill of Lincoln, go to lincolngoodwill.org.
Why is it that bad days and cigarettes go together so well? But they do. And when the stress builds up, so does my craving. Even though it's been months since I quit and I'm doing fine, it still gets to me. So I reach for my running shoes and head out into the night, putting one foot in front of the other, and my cravings behind me.
Call the Nebraska Tobacco Quit Line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW, 1-800-784-8669. Paid for by Tobacco Free Nebraska, aired with the Nebraska Broadcasters Association and this station.
Dad, I'm hungry. Why don't we have anything to eat? Those are words you never want to hear as a parent. But unfortunately, putting food on the table is a constant struggle for many low-income families here in Lincoln, and they don't have the necessary skills to get and maintain a job. They rely on volunteers at the Center for People in Need that can help them through the struggle. You can make a difference in their lives by getting involved in one of the many volunteer programs that the Center for People in Need offers. For more information, please visit centerforpeopleinneed.org.
Back live on Huskers Hoops Live. Just under 20 minutes to go on this week's episode here on 90.3 KRNU and on the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. If you want to check it out, we got a live chat going, so if you want to throw some questions in there, we've got one here asking about how the Huskers women's basketball offense will kind of flow. Is it going to be in the half court? Will it be forcing turnovers, kind of getting in transition? I think it might be a little bit of both. I think there's going to be nights where this women's basketball team faces some of these up-tempo offenses, and they may be forced to kind of play that way where they have to play fast to keep up. I remember last year against Indiana on New Year's Day, that game particularly seemed really up-tempo and fast. So that's an example, I think, where this year's squad might have to go a little bit deeper into the bench as some of these players get fatigued from a high-paced game. But there also could be games where they have to slow the possessions down, and they don't want some of these good offenses to have as many possessions. So I think they could try to rely on some half-court offense, play slow, play the smart game, and maybe get the best shot, not the first shot. So I think it's going to be a bit of both, just depending on the opponent. But let's take a look now at the Big Ten and see where Nebraska, and we'll start with the men's team here because I've been seeing a lot of talk about it being kind of a down year for Big Ten men's basketball. Not the same story for women's basketball. This is one of the best conferences in women's college basketball, but specifically for men's because we've seen some upsets. We've seen some kind of strange games, but I just want to talk about how this could impact Big Red's chances at making it to the big dance as an at-large bid. Because I don't think this team will win the Big Ten in the regular season. I think they could go on a run in the Big Ten tournament, so you never know in a one-and-done format like that. We saw Penn State do very well for themselves in the Big Ten tournament last year, coming in as a pretty low seed, but the chances of Nebraska winning the Big Ten outright in the regular season, I don't think is very high, considering there's teams like Purdue, Indiana, Illinois, some of these high-level teams, Michigan State. So just want to look at that for real quick. So if this conference is having a down year, this is the thinking here from some of the people I've seen push this narrative. If Nebraska's sitting at 8th or 9th or even like 10th in the conference, one, I don't think that's going to happen. If it does happen, something went wrong this season. But two, if it is a down year, they're wondering how many Big Ten teams will be taken to March Madness. Does Nebraska maybe need to be higher up in the Big Ten rankings than we thought in order to make the March Madness tournament and have a chance to get their first March Madness win in program history? I don't know. It's an interesting discussion, and it's not something we've seen a lot where the Big Ten is limited in terms of teams that the selection committee decides are worthy of making it to March Madness. And this discussion almost puts more emphasis on some of these non-conference games. Nebraska's got Creighton coming up. They've got a game against Oregon State this weekend that they need to win. They've got Kansas State on the schedule. So some of these non-conference games could be crucial for kind of the selection committee to value this year's Nebraska team, because let's say they think this is kind of a weaker year for the Big Ten Conference. If Nebraska still has wins over a top 10 team in the country like Creighton coming up, they've got wins against Oregon State. I don't know what they will deem that in terms of a quality win. But that's a major D1 program, and that's something that if Nebraska can get on their resume, I think could be helpful, at least moving into March. So these non-conference games, they feel not as important as the Big Ten regular season, but I think sometimes people forget that these games definitely count and can help you in terms of your resume for March, because it's not going to be easy to fight through the Big Ten. So to get some early wins against quality opponents, you need that on your resume, especially if you're a team that's looking to make it with an at-large bid like Nebraska probably is going to do this year. But the reason why people are talking about the Big Ten Conference this way is because some of these games that have already gone through in the first few weeks, we talked about it before, Michigan State being upset by James Madison, one of the biggest upsets in college basketball already this year. Rutgers lost last week to Princeton. That was a Big Ten team losing to an Ivy League school. Just strange things going on. And Rutgers is a program that is kind of needing a good year because they have some major recruits coming in next year, and they need to keep this momentum going if they're looking to take that next step as a basketball program in New Jersey. But you look also, Ohio State, they lost by 7 to the number 13 team, Texas A&M, not too long ago. They won their game prior against Oakland, but that was only by 6 points. So Ohio State's kind of questionable already at 1-1 on the year. Wisconsin, they lost to the number 7 team in Tennessee, which that was only by 10. So Wisconsin, that's actually a pretty good loss that they competed that well with a top 10 team. But then maybe the worst start in the conference, Maryland. They're a team that was great last year. Now they're starting off 1-2, back-to-back losses by 3 points. That is tough. 64-61 against Davidson on Friday this past week, and then 66-63 in a loss on Sunday to UAB. So that's kind of where this narrative of it's a down year for the Big Ten is coming from. It's not necessarily completely unfounded. There's definitely some games and some teams with some question marks early on. I'm thinking that a lot of those question marks will be gone by the time the Big Ten season starts, just because once conference scheduling begins, a lot of these teams start to pick up their level of play. They're into a rhythm once December hits. So hopefully this narrative kind of goes away a little bit, and Nebraska gets the credit they deserve for competing so well in a conference that's pretty highly respected. But you have to think, where does Nebraska stand in these rankings? You've got Michigan, you've got Purdue, Indiana. They all look very good to start the year. And Michigan specifically, people were pretty unsure about how Juwan Howard would kind of lead this year's team because they lost a lot of talent. They lost Jet Howard to the NBA. They lost Hunter Dickinson to Kansas in the transfer portal. So there wasn't a lot of returning known high-level production to the Maize and Blue squad this year, but they pick up some pretty good transfers. Olivier Kamwa and Namari Burnett specifically have been playing pretty well for them. And somebody who's back and playing well is Doug McDaniel, one of their point guards. He looked great in their game yesterday against St. John's, and I think there were probably some people who thought Rick Pitino could pick up a pretty good win against Michigan inside of, I believe they're playing in Madison Square Garden last night. So that was a big game that Michigan answered some questions at. And Namari and Doug McDaniel went off together. So Michigan seems like they're on the up and up. Illinois, they are 2-0 this year. We already saw that they're capable of taking down the number 1 team in the country in Kansas in an exhibition game a few weeks ago. So I think we're seeing that while there might have been some rough patches to start the year in the Big Ten, there's still plenty of teams that deserve credit, deserve high rankings, and are going to help Nebraska out a little bit in terms of context to the season. Yeah, Nebraska might be only 19 and whatever, but some of those losses are to some pretty good teams. And if Nebraska can continue to rebound, continue to defend, and maybe get some of those shooting splits up, they might have some pretty close losses or some good wins against these good teams. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that because I just don't want to see a narrative pushed like that potentially could cost Nebraska a chance at making March Madness. Now, I know this is a program that maybe is a little bit behind in terms of March Madness. Maybe people think, oh, they should try to get to the NIT before they start talking about March Madness wins. And I think that's a fair point. Obviously, no March Madness wins in program history. So it's kind of hard to just talk like Nebraska deserves to be at that level. But, we've seen teams a bunch kind of have big years that all of a sudden launch them up and make their program take a leap to the next level. So where they're getting 1, 2, 3 March Madness wins in one bracket. And this Nebraska team could take that same leap. I don't want to see people pushing this narrative that limits the ceiling for what Nebraska can reach just because of not necessarily their own play, but they're saying, hey, maybe the 7th best Big Ten team doesn't deserve to be in March Madness this season. I think that would be pretty extreme. I'm thinking minimum 8 of the 14 Big Ten teams will probably get there. Obviously, you've got the conference winner, and then you've got the at-large bids. We've seen in the past where the Big Ten sends 10-plus teams to March Madness, but I think in a down year that they're probably going to push a little bit. We could see maybe 9, maybe 8 teams, but that would be kind of pushing it to me. So, just Nebraska, keep an eye on it. You've got to maybe be a little bit ranked higher than you were expecting to have to get to March Madness. But just about 8 minutes left on the show. Let's get into some of these games coming up on the schedule. We've got women's basketball back in Lincoln tonight. The Alcorn State Lady Braves are going to be in town for some basketball. We'll have the broadcast for you right here on KRNU. You can keep it locked here all day for coverage of Nebraska basketball. The Lady Braves, they were 12-17 last year. They lost their lone Big Ten matchup last season to Illinois. They played the Illini, lost by 31. So Alcorn State trying to kind of recover from that whooping from a Big Ten team. So we'll see if Nebraska can kind of repeat that level of domination tonight. They are 0-1 in the 2023-24 season. They lost on last Monday, talking about Alcorn State here. They lost last Monday. They played Mississippi State. That's a 77-42 loss. But that means they should be fresh. They should be ready to go after quite a long break. So Nebraska is going to need to be ready. They return 4 starters and their top 4 scorers as well from last year's team. Their projected best scorer, though, Destiny Brown, she's a 6'3" junior, a forward. She was limited to just 3 points in the Mississippi State game. So going to be looking to see if Nebraska can kind of manage her a little bit tonight, try to keep that defense a strong suit for this team, I should say. It's been the strong suit a bit at times in these first few games, and you have to wonder how are they gonna do against Destiny Brown, because she's not going to be going for 3 points in back-to-back games after she was projected to be their best player, maybe even an all-conference player as well. So I'm assuming Nebraska is going to be collapsing on her defensively once she gets into the interior. If she's anywhere on the wing, we'll probably see a combination of Natalie Potts, Alexis Markowski, maybe even Kendall Moriarty. If she's playing at that wing position at all on the perimeter, might not see too much of that, but definitely something to watch defensively. I think probably all it will take is just Nebraska doing what they've been doing through these first few games, playing consistent, share the ball offense, good defense, good rebounding, and just efficiency overall and continuing to be effective. I think the active defense that we've seen in the backcourt from Jazz Shelley and Darian White will be on display again tonight. It's going to be fun to finally have this team back in Lincoln after being on the road at Laramie in their past game. But chance tonight to go 3-0 to start the season. So hopefully they can get it done. Some upcoming games, though, after tonight. We've got a packed schedule in college basketball this weekend for Nebraska. The women's team, keeping it locked right there. They've got Creighton on Sunday inside PBA. So that's a 1 p.m. tip-off. I'm sure the crowd is going to be packed for that game. They lost the lone matchup to them last season, so we'll see if Amy Williams can kind of get this team going. How fun would it be if Creighton comes to town? They took Nebraska down last year, and somebody like Natalie Potts riding a Freshman of the Week honor, and she just comes out and puts up her best game and proves, the first week wasn't a fluke. It's not just these lower level teams that I can dominate against. It's these high level non-conference games that I can show out as well. That's going to be fun to watch. But on the side of the men's team, you've got Stony Brook on Wednesday. So we go last night men's basketball, tonight women's, tomorrow men's basketball. It's back and forth. It's fun. It's finally that time of the year again where we've got basketball almost every single night, either Nebraska or other Big Ten games to watch. By far my favorite time of the year. And so Stony Brook is going to be in town on Wednesday for a 7 p.m. tip-off. Again, we'll have that broadcast for you right here on KRNU. You can tune in for free. After that, the men's team goes to Sioux Falls, South Dakota for a game against Oregon State. That will be in a neutral site streamed on Peacock. So that's kind of one of the new changes this season. It's the first major challenge of the year for Coach Hoiberg's squad. The Beavers are 2-0 with 2 wins over Linfield University and Troy. They've scored 80 points in both their games, so their offense is pretty high level. But Troy, that was a double overtime 1-point victory for Oregon State. From the few games I've seen, they've got some size up in front. They've got a couple of guys who are going to challenge the players like Rink Mast and Josiah Alec for Nebraska. They play Appalachian State today, so that's their only matchup between right now and the game in Sioux Falls on Saturday. So, I'm thinking Oregon State's going to be somewhat fresh, maybe more fresh than Nebraska, as the Huskers play again tomorrow in between that game. So overall, it should be a pretty fun matchup. I think Nebraska should be able to get the job done, especially if Keisei Tominaga starts to figure it out a little bit more offensively. But that's going to do it here on Huskers Hoops Live. We had one more comment outside of the non-conference K-State and back-to-back road trips to Rutgers and Iowa. The Huskers have a really good slate of bigger games at home. Does this help their chances to finish higher? I think it does. I think all of these games at home, the crowd, especially with how good this team's going to be, I think this crowd is going to show up and really be a factor inside PBA. The vault's been packed before, especially at the end of last season, and I think it's going to happen again. So we'll see if it is packed this weekend. Thank you for joining me here on 90.3 KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel. Be back Tuesday mornings every week during this Nebraska basketball season, so keep it locked right here for game broadcasts or for the Huskers Hoops Live radio show Tuesday mornings 8 to 9. But with that being said, go Big Red.
The best local bands can be heard right here. 90.3